My parents didn't raise their voices. They didn't slam doors or throw accusations. They just sat across from me in their living room, perfectly calm, perfectly rehearsed, and said they would raise my rent unless I agreed to become my sister's unpaid nanny. 4 hours every evening. 2 weekends a month. Mandatory. They called it helping family. I called it what it was, coercion wrapped in tradition. Most people break down when their own parents corner them like that. Me. Something inside me went cold, clean, sharp. Not anger, not panic, something else. Something final. They thought I'd fold the way I always had, the way they groomed me to. They had no idea I'd already discovered something they never expected, something that would change everything. My name is Lana Harper, and for most of my adult life, I thought the distance I'd built from my family was enough to breathe. Not enough to escape, just enough to pretend my choices were mine. When I moved into the small apartment my parents owned in the Connecticut suburbs 6 years ago, I believed it was practical. Affordable rent. Close to work. A quiet space I furnished piece by piece. A reading chair by the window. A soft rug I saved for. A framed print from a flea market I loved the moment I saw it. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Or so I thought. Growing up, my family looked perfect from the outside: white pillars, warm windows, coordinated Christmas outfits. The kind of family you'd assume had matching monogrammed stockings and inside jokes. But inside, everything revolved around my sister, Marissa. Always Marissa. She didn't even work for the attention. She just existed, and everyone else rearranged themselves around her. Teachers adored her. Relatives doted on her. My mother, Elaine, treated her like a polished centerpiece on display. She would brush Marissa's hair with soft, theatrical adoration, then look at me and lose the smile. I was the capable one. The reliable one. The one who didn't need anything. At least, that's what they decided. Marissa married Daniel, had 3 kids: Ava, Noah, and baby Emma, and my parents transformed their entire lives around her needs. I didn't resent Marissa. I just learned that in our family hierarchy, I was the one expected to bend. If they needed something, I adjusted. If they wanted a favor, I rearranged. If a boundary felt uncomfortable, I swallowed it. The thing about swallowing too much is that eventually something gets stuck in your throat. The week before the family meeting, I noticed small signs. Elaine's messages became more pointed. Marissa sounded exhausted. And my mother kept repeating phrases like, family responsibility, and, you're the logical choice. But I still didn't imagine they were about to shove me into a role they designed without me. The email arrived on a Wednesday. Subject line, family meeting, mandatory. I almost laughed. My mother treated cabinet color discussions like United Nations briefings. I assumed it was nonsense. It wasn't. The moment I walked into their house, the energy was off. My father, Robert, paced by the fireplace. My mother sat too straight, too still. Marissa twisted her wedding ring. A sign of guilt I'd seen since high school. You're late, my mother said. It's 11:58, I replied. The meeting was noon. She waved it off as if even time bowed to her. Sit, my father said. We need to talk. I sat. My heart sank before anyone spoke. Your sister needs help, Elaine said. Marissa whispered, I'm drowning, Lana. I nodded slowly. What kind of help? Robert stepped closer. Daily responsibility. As a family, we support each other. Elaine lifted a folded paper like a contract she'd rehearsed. A simple schedule, she said. Pick up Ava at 3:15. Pick up Noah at 3:30. Bring them home. Supervise homework. Cook dinner. Stay until Daniel returns. 2 full weekends a month. I stared. You're asking me to babysit every day? We prefer helping family, Robert said. I work until 6, I reminded them. You can adjust, he replied. And if I don't adjust? They exchanged a knowing glance. Then Elaine said it. We will raise your rent. $800 is far below market value. If you refuse to help Marissa, the rent becomes fair price. A slow breath escaped me. So you're threatening me? We are setting expectations, she corrected. Marissa played her part. Please, Lana. I really need you. Something inside me snapped. Quietly. Cleanly. Like a thread finally giving way. I need time to think, I said. We need an answer today, Robert insisted. You'll have it. But not the answer they expected. When I returned to my apartment, I closed the door and just stood there. Breathing. Letting the weight of their words settle. Then I walked to my desk. Then I pulled out my lease. And that's when everything changed. They couldn't raise my rent immediately. They needed 90 days written notice. And they were legally capped on how high they could raise it. Their bluff cracked wide open. My heartbeat shifted from panic to clarity. The anger that rose wasn't explosive. It was cold. Controlled. Purposeful. I opened my laptop. Searched apartments. Within hours, I had listings. By morning, tours. By afternoon, an application. By Thursday, approval. Thursday night, I started packing. Calm. Quiet. Efficient. Friday, I mailed my 60-day notice. Saturday, movers arrived. Sunday, I was gone. By the time my parents realized what had happened, the keys were already on the counter of my empty apartment. And I was in a new place with high ceilings, exposed brick, sunlight on my coffee mug. My phone filled with missed calls, voicemails, threats wrapped in guilt. I didn't answer. Not once. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. By the time Tuesday rolled around, my parents had tracked down my workplace. A certified envelope waited on my desk by 9 a.m. For a moment, staring at my name printed in sharp black ink, I felt a flicker of old dread. The kind that used to grip me as a kid when Elaine demanded I come downstairs or Robert used the phrase, "We need to talk." But I wasn't that girl anymore. I opened the letter. It was everything I expected. A dramatic directive demanding I return home immediately for a family discussion. A vague threat about necessary legal steps. A warning that my behavior was unacceptable. They had sent guilt and intimidation through postal service. I didn't waste a breath. I walked the letter straight into Grant Ellis's office. He was the senior attorney in our firm, the one who handled the messy cases with a patience that felt carved from stone. He read the letter once, blinked, then read it again more slowly. They don't have a case, he said finally. I assumed that, I replied. But they are escalating, he added. So what now? He folded the letter and set it aside with a calmness that reminded me why people trusted him with their lives. Now, he said, we respond. The letter he drafted was simple and devastating. All communication must go through him. Any harassment would be formally documented. No legal claim of theirs had merit. It was a warning disguised as courtesy. The silence that followed felt different. Not mine. Theirs. 3 days later, the calls stopped entirely. But chaos has a way of slipping through small cracks, and my family was nothing if not persistent. A week and a half later, my Aunt Cassandra called. She rarely involved herself in anything unless it was serious. Your parents are losing it, she said the second I answered. I leaned back in my office chair. I figured. Your mother is furious, she said. Your father is embarrassed. They went to your apartment again. Serena is panicking. I didn't say anything. I didn't owe Cassandra an explanation, a defense, or a reaction. They hired a nanny, she added gently. It is costing them a fortune. A slow breath left me. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just clarity. The consequences had finally landed where they belonged. Still, I knew the story wasn't over. 2 weeks later, Grant called me into his office again. Your parents have requested mediation, he said. Of course they had. My parents hated losing more than they valued being right. And mediation was their attempt to regain control under the illusion of professionalism. I could have refused. It wasn't required. But a part of me wanted everything on record. I wanted them to sit in a room where their excuses couldn't twist themselves into new shapes. The meeting was scheduled for a cold November morning at a conference center near downtown. I arrived early, wearing a navy suit that made me feel entirely in my body. My hair pulled back. My hands steady. My heart calm. Grant walked beside me with the confidence of a man who'd seen families implode and rebuild through a single conversation. Inside, my parents sat on one side of a long table. Elaine looked pale, but her posture was rigid. Robert looked tense, jaw locked tight. Their attorney, Patricia Winters, sat neatly beside them. They didn't look at me when I entered. The mediator, Howard Blake, explained the rules. No interruptions. Respectful language. Everyone would have time to speak. My father spoke first. He always did. We are here because our family has been fractured over a misunderstanding, he said. A mirthless laugh rose in my throat, but I didn't let it out. Not here. My mother lifted her chin. We simply asked Lana to help. We didn't expect her to run off and disappear. Flee. Disappear. Victim language meant to rewrite history. I moved according to the terms of my lease, I said calmly. Legally. Respectfully. We offered affordable housing, Robert snapped. You abused that generosity. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I just said the truth. You threatened to raise my rent unless I became Marissa's unpaid nanny. That isn't generosity. That is coercion. Patricia jumped in. My clients regret how the conversation came across. I let out a slow breath. Let's not pretend it came across wrong. They said the words clearly. They said, help or your rent goes up. Elaine's shoulders tightened. We were trying to support your sister. And you decided my life was negotiable, I said. My time. My job. My independence. All negotiable so Marissa didn't feel overwhelmed. The room went still. Even Patricia seemed unsure how to cover that. Grant leaned forward. My client is willing to maintain a relationship, but there will be boundaries. No financial leverage. No child care demands. No interference with her housing or career. Robert shook his head in disbelief. So that is it. You expect us to accept these demands? I held his gaze. I expect you to accept that I am not an extension of Marissa or your household. I am an adult. And coercion will not be disguised as family anymore. Elaine's voice cracked. We wanted you home. This wasn't about home, I said quietly. It was about control. The mediator gently redirected us. After 30 minutes more of back and forth, my parents finally agreed. No leverage. No demands. No manipulation. All future discussions required consent and respect. Patricia drafted a memorandum. We each signed it. It wasn't legally binding, but it was a boundary carved in ink. As we stood to leave, Elaine finally looked at me. Her eyes seemed smaller, more fragile, like the illusion she carried had cracked. I didn't know you felt trapped, she whispered. You didn't need to know, I said. I told you for years in 100 ways. You just didn't listen. Robert spoke last. So what happens now? I picked up my purse and exhaled. Now, I said, you deal with the consequences you created. And I live my life. Grant guided me toward the door, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a child. Leaving a battlefield. I felt like a woman reclaiming her freedom. The next morning, sunlight filled my new apartment. Tall windows. Soft coffee steam. Silence that didn't suffocate. Silence that belonged to me. No one timing my arrival. No one waiting for me to rescue them. No one shrinking my world to make theirs more comfortable. That silence felt like healing. At work, my focus returned. My chest felt lighter. My shoulders no longer braced themselves for impact. And in the background, consequences found their rightful home. Marissa hired a full-time nanny. My parents helped pay for it. Every month, they felt the cost of the choice they tried to place on me. And for once, I didn't absorb the fallout. I didn't rescue anyone. I didn't explain myself. I simply lived. And that alone felt like a quiet revolution. It took weeks for everything to settle into its new shape. Not peaceful at first, not simple, but honest. My life no longer bent around someone else's urgency. It no longer moved according to my mother's expectations or Serena's exhaustion or Robert's quiet pressure. I was living in a space built by my choices alone, and that shift was louder than anything they had ever said to me. The first morning I woke up in that apartment without a missed call or a guilt-laced message, something in me finally unclenched. The light from the tall windows spilled softly across the floor, warming the brick walls. I wrapped my hands around my mug and realized it was the first time in years that I wasn't bracing myself. There was no demand coming. No crisis. No manipulation wrapped in politeness. Just quiet. And for once, the quiet was kind. Work found its rhythm again. I showed up with a clarity I didn't know I had been missing. Reports that once dragged now felt manageable. Meetings no longer felt like something I dragged myself through. My manager even commented, almost surprised, that I seemed lighter. I didn't explain why. Some healing doesn't need an audience. Meanwhile, the consequences of my family's ultimatum found their way home. Serena hired a full-time nanny. Someone qualified. Someone she paid fairly. My parents split the cost, and according to my Aunt Cassandra, every monthly payment was a reminder of the moment they tried to use me as a shortcut. This time, I wasn't the buffer. I wasn't the fix. They were living the fallout they created. And I didn't gloat. Not once. But there was a quiet symmetry in knowing the responsibility they tossed at me had returned to its rightful place. When Serena called asking to meet, I hesitated. But the voice on the phone wasn't demanding or entitled. It was soft. It was tired. It was real. We met at a small cafe near the water. She looked older somehow. Not in years, but in weight. Her hair pulled back loosely, eyes lined with something that wasn't exhaustion so much as honesty coming through the cracks. "I'm sorry," she said before the server even walked away. She didn't elaborate. She didn't perform. She didn't explain herself through excuses or tears. She just said the words simply, quietly, like she meant them. We talked for an hour. Not about the kids, not about obligations, but about life. Her life. My life. The years we had survived under the same roof but in different worlds. We didn't magically fix everything. But for the first time, I didn't feel like the backup daughter or the automatic helper. I felt like her equal. Her sister. I didn't volunteer to babysit. She didn't ask. And that alone said everything. A few weeks later, dinner with my parents happened cautiously in a neutral restaurant halfway between our homes. It wasn't warm. It wasn't comfortable. It was careful. They asked about my new place, my work, the building, the neighborhood. I answered, but I didn't offer anything extra. I didn't shrink myself to make them feel better. I didn't soften truths to protect their pride. Our relationship wasn't healed. Not yet. Maybe never in the way it once pretended to be. But it wasn't built on obligation anymore. It wasn't built on guilt or control. It wasn't built on expectations that only moved in one direction. And that was enough. In the quiet days that followed, I realized something fundamental: leaving hadn't been a rebellion. It had been a rescue mission. And I was the one I saved. Setting boundaries didn't tear my family apart. It revealed what was already broken. And once everything was exposed, once the old pattern burned down, something new could finally grow in its place. Months passed. Serena and I met for coffee again. The nanny stayed. My parents adjusted. Their calls were less frequent, less dramatic, and more respectful. My life no longer felt like a tightrope stretched between their expectations and my exhaustion. I was no longer living in reaction to anyone. On a quiet Sunday morning, sitting in my new living room with Michael sliding an arm around me as sunlight warmed the windows, I finally felt the truth settle deep in my bones. I didn't win because they lost. I won because I healed. Because I chose myself in a family that only taught me how to choose others. Because I stepped out of a story I was never meant to shrink inside. Because I stopped waiting to be chosen and learned to stand tall on my own terms. Looking back now, I don't think about the manipulation or the threats or the night I left. I think about the rebuilding. I think about the woman I became when no one else was pulling at the edges of my life. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It is necessary. It is survival. And sometimes, it is the quietest, strongest form of victory. If you have ever walked away from a family that cornered you, or rebuilt yourself after someone tried to shrink your world, know this. You are not alone. Your story is valid. And the life you create afterward will be the truest thing you ever own. If this story resonates, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe. There are more stories ahead, and you do not want to miss the next.